far more aggressive than we are, and if they went to a deregulated model, my thinking, without experience, would be they've done it for a bloody good reason. But I haven't got the detailed knowledge to answer the question otherwise.
What is clear from the processing tomato industry is that the number of farmers has reduced significantly, and as a result, it's been a positive, obviously, and a negative. The positive out of it has come that there is much greater cohesion in the way that they operate. There is really only the one large processor, Kagoni. There are two other processors, but really it's driven by one processor. They're looking at some significant innovation, cooperation between the processor and the growers, and the processor is getting involved, more heavily involved in actually producing the raw material. So the Australian industry now is at a point where it can competitively compete with overseas markets, despite the fact that we have the disadvantages of competing against countries that have got much lower employment, cost of production. We've been able to do it competitively.
That innovation doesn't have to be a huge jump, it can be incremental. And so when I think about that, and I think about industries thinking that they've got secrets from each other, it just seems bizarre that if the way you change is actually about incremental innovation and you're stuck thinking that my next door neighbour doesn't know what I'm doing, you're living in a fool's paradise.
If you can actually see an opportunity, and often a small grower can't do it on his own, but if you can get over the hurdle of working together. I mean, farmers, I think by definition, are independent natured. I mean, that's the whole reason people get into farming. They want to go do something on their own somewhere. So you're almost driving against that philosophical bent of a farmer to do something on his own. But I think for a lot of the reasons that have been outlined today, I think it's much more difficult to do things on your own, and you actually do better working together. We've had, I suppose, in our business, a few different experiences. I work together with two brothers, which is hard. But that's been a good experience in terms of actually learning how to work together. I've been part of a business that's managed horticultural enterprises, but worked with other service providers together to deliver a result for an investor group. And that's been a collaborative operation as well. And then I've also worked together with a group of growers to form a packing business, which was a difficult exercise. We're still chewing through that. There's a few members here today, actually, of that group. But that's been a great experience just to work with a bunch of guys with a common goal. And I guess we started that with a view to exploiting an opportunity that we thought we could do better with a group of players. So I think it can be done, but I think opportunity is a key driver in group.
There's certainly that internal benchmarking thing. Between states we can really get our cases, if you like, optimised and really strong, but then present internationally as a common group. Is that your view?
Collaboration is the hardest thing you can do. And because what it means is that each partner has to be sort of vulnerable to share secrets with somebody who was potentially their competitor 5 minutes ago. And so you just can't say, let's collaborate and have a beer and off we do. It is seriously, seriously the hardest thing to do. And the best way, as you've said, the best way is to have a common goal. And the common goal is export. Because when you go and fight pears and apples in Coles and Woolies over who's selling woo, what, where, whatever, then you can fight each other, etc. But when you're sitting in Hong Kong and you've got unlimited demand and they can take everything that you can produce, you can work together and collaborate, but you still have to overcome this huge vulnerability. But again, I was in Hong Kong, we went into a supermarket with the buyer, etc. There was oranges from Queensland from 3 growers, and they had 3 different labels on them from the growers, and they didn't say Australian oranges.
Nobody knows what Queensland is.
And where's Queensland? And the buyer's saying he could sell as many oranges as he could get. But
Russell,
why are they still competing against each other, not talking to each other? They're freighting their oranges up separately, and they're sitting God. So if you have a common goal, export, huge market, then you still have to collaborate.
Russell, do you think you can use some of the skills you talked about there and some of the approaches to build collaborative skills?
I see that successful organisations where we've done things and we've pulled people together are driven by, I guess, motivation. They're motivated, so there's a common trigger that's kicked them off, whether it's an opportunity or moving away from pain or something. It's about having that common goal and that common vision, as Alan just said. And it's also about having a plan, an effective plan for how they're going to execute and how we're going to do it. And everybody agreeing what that plan is and moving ahead. Without those three components, you really struggle. You've also got to have think about organisational capability. Do we actually have the capability to pull this off? And if not, how do we go and get that capability to make sure we can do it? But that's sort of part of the planning process. But unless you have that, unless there's a strong motivation, strong vision for where we're heading, and then a really good plan, I think your chances of success are pretty slim.
You know, there's a tension there between completely sharing ideas and our intellectual property rules. You know, plant variety rights, for example, where companies are saying, you know, we put a lot of money into generating this new variety. We want return on our investment. We would like to see our plant variety rights looked after. I mean, do you have a perspective on that? Are these things reasonably in tension?
When you've made a decision that she can't go it alone anymore, then there are things that you park and then there are things that you work together on. And I think great innovative and well-driven industries have sorted through the things they're going to park and leave alone and the things they're going to work together on. And so there would be some things in the horticultural industry that you would always park when you're talking about breaking into new international markets. And knowing that you will take up that aggravation again further down the road. But I think that's part of the key, is to acknowledge that there are things that generationally we haven't agreed upon, but there are issues that we actually have to agree upon for our future.
To be successful in any agriculture or any industry, we'll have individuals who are successful farmers. They'll have a niche market. They'll do it right. But it's got to be more than just a few farmers coming together or a particular farmer saying, I see an opportunity. It has to be, there's got to be enormous collaboration between the whole industry. The Chileans were an example of that. They've said, these are the fruits that we can, or the products that we can dominate in the world.
Yeah.
And they have then said, work together, despite them competing locally when they're selling locally, but externally when they're exporting, they've said, we will produce these products and we are going to dominate those products. We're going to produce the best products and we're going to go in there with volume and we'll dictate the markets. So it's taken, the whole industry has to work together. You can't have one lot of farmers going off and saying, well, we're going to do this, another lot of farmers going off and doing their own thing. I think it is working together.
It's very difficult for horticulturists to get together. I take your point. I've watched that for 30, 40 years actually. But club varieties are proprietary varieties that have been developed by breeders, and what they do, they come to a group of growers or a marketer may take them on and they say, look, this has got this potential, cap volumes, we've got a marketing plan, and they'll collect a group of growers that will plant that variety. What then happens is those group of growers actually flip, because you're not competing, you're actually inside a circle that actually requires each other to support each other to promote the product, to actually have almost a total change in the way you view the other growers. So you're actually working together, visiting their farms, looking at how they're growing, sharing ideas. There's a bit of competition between you as growers, but really if you can help them, you'll actually help yourself in making a more robust product, but also pick up some ideas along the way. So to me, we've been involved in a few of those, and I think it's a growing area in horticulture, but that's providing at least a change in the way they view the collaborative nature of groups of growers.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I've been looking at the supermarkets lately, and they're really got on board with this sort of stuff, and they've picked, you've got to be lucky enough to be the farmer that they pick to be the face of the industry. But, if Woolworths and Coles are doing it and getting on board with their super chefs and all that sort of stuff, then that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to build that provenance thing and say, well, look at these wonderful farmers, they're doing all this great stuff, come and buy your product from here. The consumer, of course, doesn't realise that farmer doesn't produce all the product at Woolworths, but if Woolworths and Coles are driving that message, then it's probably a clear message. The challenge is, if you're delivering to Woolworths and Coles how do you capitalise on having that message on your farm? And you can't do that if you're caught up in the big marketing machine.
I think there's a great opportunity in Providence. I think particularly Shepparton, we could spin a tremendous story. We've got water coming down from the mountains, feeding all these multiple varieties of primary production sites, clean, green, that whole thing that we've been trying to sell. It probably needs more of a regional or even a state or Australian government, Team Australia approach to something like that. But I think Shepparton and the Golden Valley has a tremendous story if we could actually get our act together and promote it in a unified way. I mean, what's the problem in China? They don't want their own product. They don't want the milk powder that's tainted. They know that there's other places like New Zealand that produce quality products. So we need to actually exploit the fact of that. I don't think we've done it at all, but I think it's a great opportunity awaiting us.
I did some work years ago with some commodity groups that were looking to export into Asia, and the feedback was they saw Australians as fair weather traders. We weren't there for the long term. So as soon as domestic prices were good, we didn't bother exporting anymore, and we pulled out on them. Guess what the Kiwis do? They stay there year in, year out. I've got clients who are 100% export. We go into the domestic market when the prices are good and we put a bit into it. But we stay in that export market and we build a really strong business around it because we're there all the time. And we build long-term relationships. Sorry?
Yeah, but they're cross-subsidising. Again, it gets back to that collaborative group. You can do it if you're cross-subsidising each other, but you can't do it on your own. So we're in and out all the time. It's unfortunately we're looking inward because it's what Ellen was saying earlier on. We're selling locally, so everyone's a competitor. Whereas the New Zealanders and the Chileans and so on are looking outwards, saying, well, we've already fed our locals, we're now looking out.
But I think what probably the key to that would be identifying a pathway that's sustainable and rewards on a consistent basis, because that's actually what's hamstrung the fact that the export thing is because domestic pricing has been better and our volumes aren't that great, and that's throttled the export. It's also throttled the development of volume because you're actually looking at that. So actually the Australian market's about right and we haven't been able to export so well. So it's actually had two effects. It's throttled that a robust relationship with importers. It's also throttled the capacity of the Australian growers to actually ramp up their operations to feed that supplies. But I think the key is actually identifying here's actually a pathway, and I think it's a provenance thing because we haven't got competitive labour rates. We've got a lot of other issues against us. So it's identifying what can we do. We can do the provenance thing. Absolutely. And it's actually identifying a pathway that gets us and our provenance brand, whether it's a Team Australia brand or a Team GB brand or whatever it is, gets us to that destination in a way that actually is sustainable. And then a grower will say, okay, I can see a sustainable linkage there. I'll plant now because I've got to plant for 5 years, 6 years. I'm not doing a perennial crop. I'm not doing an annual crop, I'm doing a perennial crop. Yeah. So I'm going to plant for 5 or 6 years. I need to know that pathway has been established, and at current exchange rates or the variations that I know happen in our industry, it'll still get me there in 5 years' time. That's actually what's got to be established. It can't be just punting on the fact that there's got to be an expert market that we've got to feed it, or we can't sometimes.
I actually think you have to decide what your end point is. What's the end point for the growers? If we're talking about this region, what do you want the end goal to be? And what does it look like in 10 years? And until you've actually got that sorted and understood what that looks like and got rid of all the stuff you've been arguing about for the last 7 generations and actually park the goal is this, then you're always going to get tripped up by the 7 years of generational fighting about the road or the grid or the scales or whatever. You're always going to get caught up with that. But if you say this is our goal and this is where we're going to get to and it's going to take us 5 years to get there, then you're always going to get unpicked.
Thanks.
Target towards commercial outcomes and you'll get grower support. Queensland Fruit Fly, everyone's walked away from that. Why don't you get some research, I don't know what your background is, but get some researchers to fire up on Queensland Fruit Fly and solve that problem. Opens up a range of markets that we're actually shut out because of that. So I think if the research is targeted at commercial outcomes, you'll get grower support.
I agree with you, Russell, before, because I come from the citrus industry. That's an industry that's very, very export orientated, had to produce too much. and their dedication to exporting. They've had to export through tough times and drought, and more recently the dollar where it is. Got no choice, still got to go. But they target the markets that will give them a return, and then they target the type of product that will deliver a return. So you bring it back to the grower to grow that product. I was part of a company that for the first time exported citrus for the first time into China through the front door 4 years ago, 8 containers. I just finished with that company 400 went there this year.
20% of the pears exported last year were off the market floor in Sydney and Brisbane. If you just think about that, I don't send my stuff to Sydney and Brisbane to go to Hong Kong. Someone's grabbed that gear, banged it in a container, and shot it off to Hong Kong. Who knows what state it's in or what standard it's in? And that's a disaster if you're trying to do a Team Aussie or Team GB thing.
So it's a very complex industry, and it's been traditionally based on a family farming concept. Okay, if you go back, there's not a high level of skill necessarily within the industry. Now, this is not a question, it's not an answer, it's a comment.
It's a comment.
We do need a high level of skill base in our industry. We need a high level of expertise. We need, and it's very difficult in a small farming sense. How do you do that? It's training, but how do we get people to want to do training? How do we get people to provide training? There's a whole number of questions without the answers. But if we're going to survive in the bigger world, and I think there's heaps of opportunity as people are presenting, but this is one of the roadblocks for us, is to get our skill base and the competence of our staff to a point where we can achieve this.
40 years ago, if you came off the farm, people looked at you and you were proud to come off the farm. Now you go down to Melbourne and it frustrates the hell out of me when they talk about rural issues like it's some backyard problem. So it is a matter of us changing the perception of farming. We've got to change that whole attitude that it is a high-tech industry, that it's progressive industry, it's got a fantastic future, and people have got to make money. If they don't make money out of farming, it'll never change. We have to get that 20-30% return, and that has to be imperative.
You can get caught up in what's happening in your industry, but there are lots of other primary industries around Australia that have tackled some of the issues that you're talking about, and they've tackled them with good results, they've tackled them with not such good results. But I look at the intensity of the horticulture industry in this part of my part of the world, and all I can think of is you need to look at the aquaculture industry. Have a look at what they do around retaining staff, getting good people and people that are going to stick, what they've had to jump, the hurdles they've had to jump over, and the training they've had to put in place, not for the young people coming into the industry, but this crusted on old salty sea dogs who've got no idea about how to treat young people who are moving into the workforce. So I'd encourage those of you who are interested about the longevity of your industries to look beyond the boundaries of your industry and see the other success models, because there are some.
At least at one level. I wonder if I could just draw you into a comment, Alan. One of the things that sort of has come up, I think, is a degree of comfort around if we got the Providence story right, we'd be okay for 20 or 30 years. But I picked up from your comments that, you know, what's going to work now may not work in 20 minutes' time. So are you suggesting Providence is one, but we're going to have to keep innovating to stay in front?
Completely agree. And I think the most valuable comment today came from this gentleman over here. Tony. Who said, sorry, Tony.
I'm not sure we're awarding prizes, but...
The words were something like, they grew too many oranges, so they had to export it, and they had to fight the battles and win and lose. Okay? If you're going to export and you grow too much, and then you've committed to export, you will innovate. You will solve the problems. And let me give you a different example to show you how it happened. The biggest player in disposable nappies in this country is Huggies, right? Why are they the biggest? Because they built a factory here and the competitor didn't, and then they had to fill the factory. And then they had to keep innovating to make it work, and they compete against... But because they had to keep this thing going, they had to innovate. My best recommendation here, not being an expert, is just grow too much fruit, guys. Grow too much fruit, and then start really working out how to export it, what to do, etc. Whereas when you just grow enough to sell locally, and you pick and choose, we haven't got enough to export this year, we'll sell it locally, we'll stuff the export market, etc. In New Zealand, they grow 9 times more fruit than they eat. So they've got to export.
progressive, particularly in the fruit industry, and I mean, collaboration.
Yep.
Comes back to what Tony was saying. Why were they successful? They all worked together, and it's probably not happening here because we're so fragmented, because we have growers, we have grower exporters, we have exporters. We talked about, stuff being sold off the floor going to, export markets indirectly. So, those sorts of things shouldn't happen. So, whose responsibility is it, and how do you draw all that together?
Thanks, Aaron.
Can I add to that? Forget Team Australia. Let's do Team Shepparton.
Oh, good.
Let's get your act together. Ring up Fial and get them up here because they've got resources. They're doing Providence in Tassie. We're helping them, etc., etc. Start doing stuff. Because the way you innovate is you start doing stuff and then you learn and you change. And where you end up may not be where you thought you would, but just do stuff.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I'll probably sing from the same song sheet. I mean, I've used this comment from time to time. Fruit growers are a fragmented rabble, and I think if we could only integrate, if we could group together, and that means right down the value chain, it's understanding the market, getting a marketer that's in tune with that, that's actually has a very transparent communication with his grower base, and they work in a collaborative way. I think that to me is a successful model.
Strategy is about a medium or a long-term action to actually achieve something, and so it's about staying true to that and committed to it, and saying that's where we're heading and that's where we're going to go. And this little opportunity that pops over here is just a distraction. The big prize is up ahead, let's go for it. But we're too easily swayed to go over here and pick at stuff. So my advice, long-term strategy, stay focused.
It's all about leadership. It is. It is. It's all about people being willing to step into new spaces and have a go.